Library time, and today we're going to read another Bill Peet book. This is a new one, and it's called The Spooky Tale of Prewit Peacock. He doesn't quite look exactly like the peacocks, does he, for some reason? Remember when we read Bill Peet books, he's always got eyes and lots of wonderful pictures to look at. Prewit was a wild peacock who lived far out in the jungle where most wild peacocks live. However, Prewit was not as proud as a peacock, for he had nothing to be proud of. A peacock's great pride is in his glorious tail, with all the beautiful blue-green eye spots. See, those look like eyes, don't they? Prewit's tail was no more than a few scraggly feathers with only 2 eye spots. His was indeed a sad tail, and Prewit was indeed a sad peacock. Phineas was the proudest of the peacocks, but then he had the most fanciful tail with the most beautiful eye spots. Now see all of theirs, and Prewit's only had 2. His eye spots were more beautiful than all the others, so he naturally was the leader of the flock. Wherever they went, Phineas always strutted proudly at the head of the procession, with his tail fanned out in his glory. And last of all came Prewit with his scraggly tail dragging behind him. But when it came to facing a tiger, the other peacocks were not one bit better than Prewit. They were all equally scared. Fortunately, the peacocks had but one tiger to worry about. That was Travis. Oh, my grandson's name is Travis. He's wonderful. He wouldn't be scaring away the peacocks. But Travis was a scrawny, toothless old fellow. Other tigers had much better things to do than to chase peacocks and end up with a mouthful of feathers. But toothless old Travis could no longer afford to be choosy. He was down to such small game as toads and tadpoles. To him, a peacock would be a fanciful feast if he could ever catch one. For such an old cat, he was pretty spry and ever so sly. So the peacocks always kept an eye out for old Travis. The second he made his leap, they took off like a shot to go fluttering up into the treetop. It was always a close call. There they are up in the trees. Once the peacocks had recovered from their fright, the first thing they did was check their tail feathers to be sure they hadn't lost any. Losing a tail feather was always heartbreaking for a peacock. Prewit's scraggly nothing of a tail was something he would never need to worry about. At least so he thought. But then Prewit was in for a surprise. His tail was growing. It had more growing to do, much more. One day he noticed that the eye spots had doubled in size. Now, if we go back here to page 1, see his tail and his eye spots. Now look at it now. And yet that was not the end of his tail. It continued to feather out. And before long, a jagged mouth appeared just below the enormous eyes. And then finally out sprang a pair of feathery arms with wildly clutching claws. "My tail has gone wild!" exclaimed Prewit. "It's turned into a green-eyed monster. What a terrible tail!" "But then, after all," he sighed, "I grew it, so I suppose I will just have to get used to it. I only hope the other peacocks can." But the other peacocks paid so little attention to Prewit that a week passed before they noticed his tail had gone wild. When they did, it hit them all at once. They let go with such terrified shrieks that they could be heard all the way to Mandalay. It took 10 minutes for Phineas to settle them down. Then, in a fury, he turned to Prewit. "What's come over you, Prewit? What on earth have you done to your tail?" "Nothing. It just grew that way." "The thing is downright spooky," said Phineas. "It gives me the creeps." "Oh, it gives me the creeps too. But what can I do?" "Keep it to yourself," said Phineas. "Hold it down. Living out here in the jungle is scary enough without that spooky tail of yours popping up." Keeping his tail down was no problem for Prewit, since he was not the least bit proud, and letting his tail drag the ground had been a lifelong habit. But this was an entirely different tail, and not one bit droopy. It was springy. One afternoon, to Prewit's surprise, up it sprang, and there was Phineas. Phineas was furious. "Prewit, what did I tell you?" But, said Prewit, "it's nothing but a bunch of feathers. Feathers can't hurt anyone." "Feathers or not, it scares the wits out of us. So you either get rid of the thing or leave the flock. Take your choice, and let me know first thing in the morning." Oh, dear. When Prewit settled down to roost that night up in a treetop, his head was in a whirl. As awful as it is, he thought, my new tail is better than no tail at all. Yet if I keep it, I must leave the flock and go wandering about by myself. Either way would be sad, so I better sleep on it and decide in the morning. As he slept, Prewit dreamed a weird dream. Out of the mist came a teary-eyed elephant with no trunk. Then came a giraffe with no neck, followed by a sheepy-looking camel with no humps at all, and finally a pitiful peacock with no tail. It was Prewit, and close behind were all the other peacocks laughing. As the laughter exploded into wild cackling, the tailless peacock suddenly turned into a lizard and slithered under the rock. The next morning, Prewit awakened in a cold sweat, and after checking his tail to be sure it was still there, he fluttered down to join the flock. "Well," said Phineas, "have you decided? Do you go, or does your tail go?" "We are both staying," said Prewit, "so there." "Oh, no, you don't," cried Phineas. "Come on, everybody, grab a feather. Off with his tail." As the peacocks closed in with beaks snapping, Prewit whirled about and took off through the jungle. The chase was on. The peacocks are very poor flyers, so it was more of a fluttering around than chasing. Can you see this part? Although Prewit was a bit smaller with shorter legs, he was a little bit quicker. By zigzagging in and out through the trees and darting under the bushes and the ferns, Prewit managed to dodge his pursuers. But try as he might, he could not shake them. The peacocks kept right on his tail. Finally, in desperation, he headed out for an open field. Prewit figured they wouldn't dare follow. It was much too great a risk for a peacock to venture out into the open. But dare they did. The peacocks were determined to catch Prewit, no matter what. As he went Plowing through the tall grass, they were just a few steps behind and gaining on him fast. Prewit just about to be caught when all of a sudden, a tiger reared up out of the grass. It was old Travis. And just like that, the chase was over. It was too late to turn back, and with no trees to flutter into, the peacocks were doomed. They were too terrified to move, so they just stood there waiting for the finish. Then, just as the tiger was all set to spring, he let out a yell of terror, and then in a panic, old Travis went leaping and bounding away to disappear in the distance. The peacocks were left stunned and bewildered. What could have frightened the tiger? They wondered as they looked frantically about. Then all at once, there it was, Prewit's spooky tail. When Prewit caught sight of the tiger, the tail sprang up in all its horror. There was no doubt but that Prewit's tail had saved the day. When Phineas finally found his voice, he cried, "Prewit, how can we repay you?" "Oh, there's no need to. It was nothing I did. It was just my tail." "Just the same," said Phineas, "you deserve a reward. How would you like to take my place? We would be proud to have you as our leader." "Yes, yes," cried all the others, "ever so proud." "Oh, no," said Prewit. "I'm not bossy enough to be the leader. Besides, I'd rather just wander about as I please." "Then would you mind if we tag along?" said Phineas. "Just to keep you company?" "I don't mind. Tag along if you like." From that day on, wherever Prewit went, the other peacocks followed close behind, very close. And with so many faithful followers, Prewit finally agreed to be their leader. They were behind him 100%. Of course, Prewit knew why, but just the same, he couldn't help being proud. Now at last, Prewit was truly proud as a peacock. And that's another wonderful Bill Peet story. Isn't he great? I love Bill Peet. I am reading to you in the dining room today. Do you see what Mrs. Auclair has been doing in her spare time? And Mr. Auclair, for Mr. Auclair's birthday, Mrs. Judah gave her father a puzzle. And let me show you. This has been some puzzle. There's a train with people on it coming through a covered bridge. But here's the sky and see the trees. Oh, Mrs. Auclair's having a terrible time. All of these green pieces that I have to match together. Here's a picture. And it has been a humdinger of a puzzle. But I love doing puzzles. And I hope you've had some fun things to do after you finish all your schoolwork, and I hope our reading library stories has been a help to you too. Bye.